Hello, welcome to my channel, or welcome back. I am Dan Dan, and today we're going to be talking about the 2023 movie All of Us Strangers. And a little behind the scenes note, I actually already recorded this video and I had over an hour of footage, and then I lost all of it, except for like 5 minutes at the beginning, but that's really not enough to be salvaged. But also, I feel like in that video I talked for far, far too long, so hopefully, second time around, I can get all I want to say out in a more concise manner. So, with that being said, let's get right into it. So, as I said, All of Us Strangers is a film that was released in 2023. It's directed by Andrew Haigh and it stars Paul Mescal and Andrew Scott. Now, I watched this movie last spring semester's final week in my dorm room alone, and it had a heavy and substantial impact on my mental state for the weeks following, I would say, and a lighter impact on my mentality for the year following. Seriously, though, I've been thinking about this movie ever since I watched it. This summer, I even wrote a 30-page analysis of the film, completely unprompted, just for fun. So today I'm going to tell you guys a little bit about the film and the themes that it explores, how it explores them, and why I like it so much. I'm going to try not to get too much into the nitty-gritty of the plot or give any spoilers for the end. Hopefully, I might be spoiling some things, so I would highly recommend you watch the movie before watching this video, but I'll try to keep at least the biggest spoiler in my mind to myself. So the movie is actually an adaptation of a novel by Taichi Yamada called Strangers that was released in 1987, and the book follows a solitary middle-aged screenwriter who re-encounters his long-dead parents and begins paying them visits while he's developing a relationship with a woman in his apartment building. And the plot of All of Us Strangers is very much taken from this book, with one major exception, which is that Andrew Haigh chose to center the film around a gay character. So therefore, instead of forming a relationship with a woman in his apartment building, he's forming a relationship with a man in his apartment building. And Andrew Haigh actually explained this decision in an interview, and he said, "It was definitely wanting to explore and express how I feel about a certain generation of gay men, basically my generation. I've wanted to do that for a while, but I could never really quite find the right story to do it. And then telling it in the form of this strange ghost story about essentially what haunts us felt like the perfect way to explore a certain generation of people and what happened to us in the 80s and 90s. Connecting that with a story about grief and about a need to reconnect with parents felt like this perfect osmosis." So with that being said, I'm going to give you a brief recap of the major plot structure of the film, basically. So it follows Adam, who is played by Andrew Scott, and he is a solitary screenwriter living in this new build apartment building in London, and he revisits his long-dead parents who died when he was 12, and he visits them and they are stuck in the age that they were when they died, but obviously he has grown up and is now older than them, and it is never fully explained if these are phantoms or ghosts or figments of his imagination, so that one's kind of up to the reader to interpret, or the viewer. And while that is happening, Adam is falling in love with this other man in his apartment building named Harry, who is played by Paul Mescal. And through that relationship, Adam learns how to let himself have intimacy and let people into his life. And the film just kind of alternates between these two situations. So you'll have one major scene with Harry, one major scene with the family, back and forth pretty much for the entirety of the film. Now, there's kind of three main themes that I want to explore in this film, which are relationships with family, queer intimacy, and loneliness. And these three often blend together and intersect in really, really interesting ways, but I've tried to divide my thoughts roughly along the lines of those three themes. So in the first scene we have with Adam and his parents, we see Adam go out into the suburbs of London where he lives, and he is out at a park and he sees a man in the tree line who kind of beckons him over, and then as he walks closer, he turns away, and Adam just continues to follow him. And at first, when I watched this, I very much thought that this was a nod to gay cruising, which is a thing in gay male culture primarily, where you seek out others in public to have sex. And it was much more common back in the day when it was harder to find other queer people in natural ways without having to out yourself. Now, as Adam follows this man, we do eventually get led back to a house where we meet a young woman who opens the door, and we learn that these are, in fact, actually Adam's parents. But the nod to gay culture was actually intentional. I found a interview with Andrew Haigh where he explained his decision in framing that film or that scene in that way, where he says, "In a messy way in my head, I knew that I wanted it to feel almost erotic or spine-tingling or strange somehow. There is a sense that he's drifting off into the past. When your sexuality plays such a big part in yourself and your past, it just made sense to bring that into the scene." So in this introduction to the parents, we're already getting a sense that Adam's trauma about his past and his identity as a gay man have some sort of interconnection. Now, the next time that Adam goes back to see his family, it is only his mother who is home, who quickly ushers him upstairs as he is sopping wet from the rain. And we see Adam's childhood bedroom, which, may I say, incredible set design. It looks like straight out of an 80s little kid's room, like straight out of his memory from what it looked like in the 80s. And then his mom gives him this incredible sweater to wear that is actually his dad's sweater. And there's a few great sweaters in this film, which is why I wore this sweater. It's not as good as the ones in the film, but it is one of the only like patterned sweaters I actually own. That's not like, I mean, it's pretty Christmassy, but it's not explicitly Christmassy. But I wish I had the ones from this film. Anyways, after Adam gets changed, he goes downstairs and has this conversation with his mom where she's trying to get to know him again after not knowing him since he was 12. And right at the beginning of this conversation, we can tell that things might get a little bit awkward when she asks him if he has a girlfriend, and he says, "No, I don't have a girlfriend." And a pause happens before he adds, "I don't have a girlfriend because I don't like girls. I'm gay." And the mom doesn't exactly have the best response to this, being that she is directly out of the 80s. And this interaction that she has with Adam, I think, really well represents generational attitudes about sexuality and what it must have been like to come out to a somewhat conservative parent in the 80s. She brings up so many things that are concerns that are raised by like well-meaning but still bigoted parents. For example, she brings up the AIDS epidemic and is like, "What about this ghastly disease? Do I have to worry about that?" And Adam quickly reassures her, like, no, that's done now. Like we're past the epidemic of that. And then, of course, she starts talking about what other people will think, like what the neighbors will think. She asks him, like, "Are you out about it? Like, out on the street? Aren't people, like, mean to you?" And Adam has to exasperately explain to her that, like, it is more accepted now, and people aren't just blatantly mean to your face most of the time about being gay, and men can marry men, and women can marry women, and they can adopt children together. And the whole conversation is really interesting, but I think there's one exchange that really stands out to me, and it is when she tells Adam they say it's a lonely life, and he quickly and dismissively says, they don't say that anymore, actually. And she responds with, "So you're not lonely then?" And Adam pauses for a second and says, "If I am, it's not because I'm gay. Not really." And we'll talk more about loneliness and the not really of that a little bit later, but I just want you to keep that little nugget in mind as we go. And Andrew Haigh explains what this scene with the mother means to him, and he says, "It's about a son telling his mother that he's gay, but it's also about an adult living now being reminded of what it felt like to be gay in the 1980s. And I think Andrew Scott does a really good job of portraying that on his face. You can see that in confronting his mother and the views that she holds, he is reminded of when he was a little 12-year-old boy facing these same generational attitudes about homosexuality from everyone around him. And unfortunately, Adam leaves this conversation without reconciliation. Andrew Haigh said of this, "The mother has made flapjacks, something he has always loved as a kid, and at the end she decides not to eat them. That's quite brutal, as if this beautiful, nostalgic thing has been fundamentally altered." The next conversation that Adam has with his parents is with his dad one-on-one, and this is one of the most emotionally raw scenes in the film, from my opinion, and it is so interesting the way that Adam's dad first tries to diffuse the situation with humor. When Adam asks, like, were you shocked? He says, I always knew you were a bit tutti frutti. But as the conversation progresses, he is just radically honest with his son as to what his state of mind was back then and why he made the decisions that he did. So Adam tells him that he would get picked on at school and he would come home and cry in his room every night. And his dad admits that he would hear him crying and wouldn't come in or didn't say anything to him. And when Adam asks him why, he says, I just didn't want to think of you as the kind of boy that would get picked on. And I knew that if I were in your school, I would have picked on you too. And then Adam responds, I think I always knew that, and that's why I never told you. And then after this radical honesty, Adam's dad is able to recognize the harm that his past actions has done to his son and is able to apologize for that and says, like, I'm so sorry I never came into your room as a kid. And when Adam insists, like, oh, it's okay, he says, but it's not really. And then Adam breaks down in what I think is one of the most emotional sections of the film.
Sorry I never came in your room when you were crying.
No, really, it's okay.
It's not okay, though, really, is it? It's not.
Dad, I get it. It was so long. It was so long ago. Stop.
Can I hug you now?
Yeah, please.
You're all right, son. You're all right.
And the image shown in the mirror of Adam's younger self hugging his father is a visual representation of the childhood trauma and the familial bonds that have been healed in this moment. A similar thing happens in the next scene that Adam shares with his parents. That happens on the Christmas Eve before his parents are killed in a car crash. And Adam in this scene has woken up in his childhood pajamas that are like 7 sizes too small for him. And he's on his knees while his parents are standing, so he's kind of really physically regressed into his childlike state. And they're decorating the Christmas tree together and singing. And it just shows the importance of these happy memories that the family had together. And then at the end, they take a picture together, and it switches from a picture of them in the present of the story with Adam being grown up to the same picture from when it actually happened when Adam was 12. And you can see the stark difference that in Adam's general demeanor. In the old picture, he looks so much more sullen and withdrawn, and it's just so heartbreaking to think that this is the kid who would wake up the next morning to learn that both of his parents were gone. But through this scene and the final scene at the diner that I'm not going to go too far into just to avoid spoiling the film, we see their family relationship mend itself, and we see Adam get the love and acceptance he needed from his dad and his mom. And then when we get to family on Harry's side of things, he doesn't say much about them, but the one time he does talk about his family, I think, is very interesting, so I'm going to tell you a little bit about that scene. So the conversation starts when Adam asks Harry if his parents know that he's queer, and he says, yeah, and Adam asks if they're okay with it. And he says, they're okay. I mean, they're pretty old school, probably less okay than everyone's meant to be. But it's when he's asked to elaborate on that I think things get really interesting. When Adam prompts why that's okay and if it makes him sad, Harry responds, no, I think it's just inevitable, really. I've always felt like a stranger in my own family, and then coming out just puts a name to that difference that's always been there. So in the end, it's not really anyone's fault. And I just think that idea of a family who is just okay with your sexuality and how that can still isolate you and make you feel like you are othered is a really interesting conversation. And I really like just the wording of everyone, like my sister and her husband and my brother and his wife, and all of them have this spot at the center of the family, whereas I have drifted off to the edge, about to fall over. Right, so now I want to talk about some of the queer themes in the film, and we're going to start with just discussing queer intimacy in general in the film. And I think that the depiction of queer intimacy is just beautiful in this film. The first time that Adam and Harry hook up, the beginning of the conversation is very respectful of boundaries and everything. Harry asks Adam, "How about I kiss you right now?" And then as they're beginning, they establish kind of a physical connection just through putting their hands on each other's thighs, and you can feel the closeness in that moment. And it's made more endearing then when Adam has to stop Harry and pull back and say, "I need to catch my breath. I haven't done this in a while." And you just feel kind of the little butterflies in your stomach that you feel when you have that kind of a potential new connection with someone. And Andrew Haigh clearly put a lot of thought into the sex scenes of this film. He said of them, "Sex scenes are so difficult to shoot. What you have to do is make sure that each actor knows what the intention of that scene is. What does Harry need to do to make Adam feel comfortable? Because it's clear that Adam is holding something back. So what can you do to soften that in order for them to connect?" It's very written out in the script, like when Adam laughs that he's forgotten how to breathe because he hasn't kissed for a while. You're getting to know him there. You understand his reticence and his nervousness. It's not that he's a prude. He just hasn't made out with a guy for a while. I knew I wanted it to feel very sensual in terms of touch and feel and sound. We heighten the sound of skin touching skin so you can feel the sort of tender electricity. It has to feel sexy and intimate and a bit dirty in a good way. And overall, I think the sex scenes in this film do a good job being hot and passionate and intimate without feeling like raunchy or exploitative, but also not feeling too soft or like fluffy. I think they hit a really good tone with it, and I think they do a great job with framing and having some shots where like things are very strategically placed to clearly imply certain things but not show anything explicit. Another aspect of queer identity that is explored in this film during one of the scenes between Adam and Harry is the word queer itself as an identity. So when Adam and Harry are meeting for the first time, things are getting a little bit flirty between them, and Harry stops and says, "Just checking, you are queer, right?" And Adam responds, "Yeah," or "gay. Queer, I can't get used to calling myself queer. It was always such an insult." To which Harry responds, "It's probably why we hate gay so much now. I mean, it was always like, your haircut's gay, the sofa's gay, your trainers are gay, your school bag's gay." And I just think this conversation is an interesting and accurate depiction of trends in generational perspectives towards queer labels. Obviously, not everyone in a generation will have the same feelings towards a certain label or word. But I do think that in general, younger generations of queer people, because they grew up in a time in like the 2010s where at least I never really heard queer being used as a slur towards people. I've never really heard the word at all, to be honest. But I definitely heard things being called gay in a disparaging way. And if you've ever seen the Hillary Duff commercial, "Don't say that's gay," you'll know what I'm talking about.
So gay.
Really?
Yeah, it's totally gay.
You know, you really shouldn't say that.
Say what?
Well, say that something's gay when you mean it's bad. It's insulting. What if every time something was bad, everybody said, "Oh, that's so girl wearing a skirt as a top"?
Oh, you are.
Those are cute jeans, though. When you say that's so gay, do you realize what you say? Knock it off.
So I can see why Adam and people of his generation who grow up in the 80s and 90s, hearing that term used disparagingly towards them or other people like them, maybe are hesitant with the reclamation of it as an identity. But as someone of a younger queer generation, I really embrace the term. I see myself as being queer. It's like my main identity, I would say. And to me, it's just a great overarching word to represent just a way of being that refuses to fit into societal standards and binaries about sexual attraction, sexual orientation, gender identity, gender presentation. So it becomes less about a specific identity and more about just a framework of approaching life and yourself. And I think that's kind of what Harry's getting at when he kind of follows Adam's response with a little quip where he says, "Queer does feel polite somehow, though. You know, it's like all the dick sucking's been taken out." Another aspect of this film that I think is interesting is living in a society that has progressed in queer rights, but still seeing the pain and the lasting effects of a lack of queer rights in the past, or a worse attitude towards queer people in the past. And I think this is really shown through the conversation with Adam's mother and the attitudes that she continues to bring up and perpetuate to Adam. It also shows up in a lot of subtle references to the AIDS epidemic throughout the film. For example, in one of the scenes, Adam is running down a tunnel of a subway, and all of the ads on the side are old, like, public health adverts from the UK from the AIDS epidemic. And one of the things that Adam's really having to cope with in this film is that he never has fully addressed the effects of growing up in that environment in himself, and has never grappled with how that has affected him to this day, and how he views himself and how he is able to let other people in. And because he's never addressed or healed that, any reminder of the past like that kind of sends him back to his childhood self and makes him feel what he felt back then. When Harry's describing his relationship with his family to Adam, Adam starts crying and says, "You know, it's funny, it doesn't take much to make you feel how you felt back then, standing there, skin all raw." So now we're going to move into the third theme that I mentioned, which is loneliness, but we're still going to stay a little bit on the queerness. So I told you we'd be revisiting the line, "If I am lonely, it's not because I'm gay, not really." Now, this is one of the lines that has been stuck in my noggin since I've seen this movie. And part of understanding this line, I think, has to do with understanding the concept of minority stress. So minority stress theory kind of explores the understandings that social, psychological, and structural factors can account for mental health and physical health inequities that face sexual minority populations. So, for example, exposure to discriminatory policies and laws, chronic stressors like increased rates of poverty, acute stressors like hate crimes, and more minor everyday experiences of discrimination like microaggressions or being treated with disrespect can all really build up and negatively impact the mental health of queer people. And on top of that, the self-image or the internalized stigma against oneself for being queer can really do numbers on a especially young person's mental health. And that internalized stigma may even cause the person to project the stigma onto others and fear really letting people in to know them because they think that other people will judge them. And we can clearly see that this is part of why Adam is feeling so isolated in his adulthood. He was never able to confront his identity with his parents, and he tells his mom at one point when he moved schools, he made sure he fit in, which I think we can assume means he was closeted and he never told anyone about his queer identity. He also tells his mom at one point that he never thought it was worth the effort of wanting kids or wanting to get married because it wasn't a possibility for so long. He tells Harry that he was afraid to have sex because of the AIDS epidemic, and that kept him from exploring his sexuality for so long. And of course, he tells his dad about the people that would bully him in school. And all of those things have caused Adam to build a fort around his heart and his soul and be reluctant to let anybody in. So when he says, if he's lonely, it's not because he's gay, not really, I think part of it is because he's gay. It's because he has to be more cautious about who he interacts with, and he feels a need to limit his connection with others, and he has a more difficult time finding partners, and he feels out of place in certain settings, and he grew up with institutions and attitudes that were telling him that he was different and wrong in some way, and that there's no way that that can't affect someone's self-worth and their ability to form meaningful relationships. I also found this article on Slate that explores gay loneliness in the modern day, and they say that it's an impossible situation contemporary gays find ourselves in. The promise of acceptance and tolerance if we force ourselves into relationship models that often chafe. The way that rights of access to straight institutions, like military service and marriage, have divided us from our queer and trans sisters and siblings. The gentrification of our community spaces out of major urban centers. And the ingrained misogyny that leads to a drive towards hypermasculinity and thinness. And obviously that's written from a cis gay male perspective, but I think that all members of the queer community can relate to the idea that although we are generally making societal gains in inequality, there are setbacks and there are so many things that we have yet to achieve, and just knowing that there are people out there who wouldn't want to form a relationship with you because of your identity makes you more hesitant to make those connections. It makes you more hesitant to talk to people if you don't know if they're going to respect who you are. But I could talk about queer isolation for hours and hours, so I am going to move on more generally to loneliness as a theme in the film. So you may have heard in recent years the phrase loneliness epidemic. And while coronavirus and the lockdown definitely had a big impact on this, it was definitely a thing before COVID-19, and it continues to be a thing even as lockdown orders have been over for years. And part of the reason for this is an increase in individualism and a reliance on consumerism and corporatism. So by emphasizing individual achievement over community, and by getting rid of public community spaces, people have become generally more isolated and less exposed to everyday contact with other human beings. And one way I think this is expressed really well in the film is through the setting of the apartment building that Adam and Harry live in. Andrew Haigh says of the location for this filming, "We found a building in Stratford on the edge of London, which suited a person like Adam who has locked himself away from the world and has a routine that keeps him in that aloneness." And that feeling of aloneness comes from the artificial and kind of gentrified cookie-cutter nature of the apartment building that they are in. It's clearly a new build apartment that's likely owned by a large landlord corporation, and at the moment, Adam and Harry are the only ones who have moved in. Harry even comments on this feeling of isolation of the building when he first meets Adam.
We're basically the only ones here. Can you fucking believe that? I mean, they haven't got security guards yet. I'm Harry.
Adam. How do you cope? With what?
Listen. It's so quiet. I mean, London's out there, but we can't hear a fucking thing.
So even though they are so close to a bustling international city of so many different people, Adam still finds himself in this environment that feels very closed off and isolated. That isolation is also furthered by the fact that in the movie there's only really 4 characters: Adam, Harry, and Adam's parents. I already said that nobody else seems to live in Harry and Adam's apartment building, but we also don't really see extras very much in the film at all. In a few scenes when Adam is out at the park or he's traveling on the train, or in one sequence that I will talk about later where he goes to the club with Harry, we do see people, extras in the background, but Adam never really interacts with them. So by limiting the cast to these 4 characters and having pretty much nobody else interact with them throughout the film, it really heightens that sense of isolation. So now I'm going to quickly discuss some technical aspects of the film. So we're going to start with cinematography and frame composition. I think the opening shot of this film, it is a long shot of the outside skyline with a sunset, and Adam's face slowly fades in. And I think that it really establishes kind of the lost and unreal tone and a lot of the colors and visual motifs that will continue throughout the film. One of these motifs being the use of reflections. So this appears in the first encounter of Harry and Adam, where Harry is first shown kind of in a mirrored reflection inside Adam's house. And this kind of separates the characters in the shot using the framing of the front door, and it kind of emphasizes their disconnect in this scene. Andrew Haigh says of this scene, when Adam opens the door on Harry, we first see Harry's face in a mirror on the wall. There are a lot of mirrors and reflections in the film, and I like it here because it's as if Adam is being faced with a reflection of himself, someone else who is intensely alone and is reaching out looking for help. Additionally, right after this scene, we see Harry in the elevator, which is entirely mirrored, and there are many, many reflections of himself that kind of show his fractured mental and emotional state at that point. Additionally, in Harry and Adam's second encounter, it is also in the elevator, and the replicants of themselves kind of seem to be moving towards each other, foreshadowing their future connection. And interestingly, most of Harry's face is seen through the reflection, whereas Adam's face is much more focused in as his real face. There's also a lot of use of windows or photos kind of in a similar way to the mirror as a framing device. So Adam first sees Harry through the window, and he later looks out of his window to see Harry again. There's several times where Adam's face is shown in a window of a train when he is going to and from his parents' house. And the first time Adam goes back to his childhood home, he sees a vision of his childhood self in the window. There's also a strong use of fades as transitions throughout the film, which can add to that like dreamy and unreal feeling of it. It also creates a blending or a juxtaposition of the two images that more clearly create a message. So, for example, in one of the shots where it's a wide open shot of the nature where Adam has gone, and then it fades to a picture of Adam's face, we kind of see that wide open, vast isolation of the nature is to reflect the mental state that Adam is in at this moment. Now, in speaking of the general cinematography and lighting and style of the film, there is one scene that very much stands out as different from the rest of the film, and it is when Adam and Harry go to a queer club and do ketamine in the bathroom. So Andrew Haigh says of this scene, there is a lightness to Adam at this point. A burden has been lifted and he wants to go out and show the world he's in the early stages of a romantic relationship. And this scene already feels different from the start because it has so many extras, and as I discussed, so many of the other scenes have little to no extras. It's just mainly the four main characters. But also, once they take the ketamine, the cinematographic style changes a lot, and there's a lot of use of bright colors in the lighting. There's some use of like visual distortion. There's strobe lights. There's a lot of quick cuts and close shots that kind of make you feel as if you are in this high stakes, high energy environment, and maybe not 100% in your best mental state. Andrew Haigh said of the scene, the lighting in the club was limited, so we put in lots of vibrant pinks and deep purples. There is something sexy and dark and erotic about that color scheme that speaks to the gay clubs of the past. This scene feels so different from the rest of the film, but also recalls colors that we use elsewhere. I love how the lighting scheme develops, and I love how we start to make it stranger and a little bit uncomfortable. Next, I want to talk about the sound design of the film and the soundtrack. So there's a pretty minimal sound design throughout most of the film. As I mentioned earlier, Harry points out to Adam at the beginning of the film how quiet it is, and he says, never could stand the silence. And that silence kind of continues throughout most of the film. Now, it's not complete silence. Most of the time, the soundscape is limited to a lot of low droning notes and a subtle score in conjunction with low ambient noises like trains, cars, and animals. But there are a few songs in the film that I would like to address because I think they have important roles to play thematically. So in the ketamine sequence that I was discussing earlier, the song Death of a Party by Blur is playing in the background. And Genius describes this song as a trip-hop influenced track about STIs, specifically AIDS, and the people who have died or had their lives ruined due to these infections and illnesses. So along with being another tie-in to the AIDS epidemic and the effect that that had on Adam coming into his identity as a queer man, the lyrics of the song also kind of have a foreboding feeling that leads to the rest of the film. So one of the lyrics that I think really captures the essence of this moment is, "The death of the party came as no surprise. Why did we bother? Should have stayed away." Another song that I think is really pivotal in the film is Always on My Mind by the Pet Shop Boys. This is playing when Adam is back with his family and they are decorating the Christmas tree. And what's so special about this song is it starts playing on the radio, and at this point, the last conversation Adam had with his mom was when he told her he was gay, and it went kind of bad. And as the song starts playing, Adam's mom starts singing along, and if you listen to the lyrics, it really is her trying to express her apologies to Adam for reacting in that way and telling him that she does still love him. So some of the lyrics from this song are, "Maybe I didn't treat you quite as good as I should. Maybe I didn't love you quite as often as I could. Little things I should have said and done, I never took the time. You were always on my mind. And if I made you feel second best, I'm so sorry I was blind." So as the mom starts singing this, it's kind of an implicit recognition of her love for Adam and how, although she has messed up and reacted badly in certain situations and maybe wasn't the best mother that she could have been back in the day, she wants Adam to know that she does deeply love him and care about him and wants to try to do better by him. Lastly is the song The Power of Love by Frankie Goes to Hollywood, and this song is actually played twice in the film, but I'm going to start with what Andrew Haigh said of this song. And he said, "That song was always in the script. In fact, most of the songs are in the script. But as an 11-year-old kid, I bought the Frankie Goes to Hollywood album. I used to sing that song in my bedroom, not really even knowing why I loved it so much. It's actually quite a subversive love song because it's written by a bunch of gay dudes in the 80s in a really tough time as AIDS was devastating communities. I always knew I wanted to get it in a film, and it made perfect sense for it being at the end of this." So as Andrew Haigh says there, it is at the end of the film, but it is also playing when Harry knocks on Adam's door and meets him for the first time. So Adam was watching an old Top of the Pops performance from 1984 of the song The Power of Love when Harry comes to his door, and there's a lyric in the song that says, "I'll protect you from the hooded claw, keep the vampires from your door." And this comes back later in the conversation when Harry, visibly drunk, after being rejected by Adam, leans in and whispers, "There's vampires at my door." And this is kind of a secret plea of Harry's, that he's facing darkness and demons at his door, and he's asking Adam here to help fight them away. And unfortunately, Adam does turn him away in this first meeting. But the song returns again at the ending of the film when we are watching it's a slow pull out of the two of them holding each other in a bed. And the lyrics play, "Love is the light, scaring darkness away. Purge the soul, make love your goal. Love is danger, love is pleasure, love is pure, the only treasure." And I think ending with this song really brings the main theme of love and care and compassion to the forefront. And I think this choice of ending song really conveys what Andrew Haigh was trying to get across with this film. He says, "By the end of the film, to me, it's basically saying that what is important in life is love, in whatever way you manage to find that. Whether it's in a relationship, whether it's with your parents, whether it's with a friend, you go through life finding love, losing love, and finding it again." And that heart of the story and the way that it explores queerness and intimacy and loneliness and childhood trauma really is what makes this film so interesting, as well as the incredible acting by Andrew Scott and Paul Mescal, and the way you can clearly tell that specifically Andrew Scott has a personal connection to the source material. Andrew Scott, if you don't know, is gay. But it really shines through that he and the director feel very passionately about the source material and can see themselves in these characters, which just makes it so much more real and so much more relatable. All right, I think that's all I have to say in this video about All of Us Strangers. I could yap about it forever and go through line by line and scene by scene and tell you my thoughts, but I will save you and I will give you what is already an ungodly long video on this movie. But I'm going to try to link the essay I wrote on this down below. You do not have to read it, it's long as fuck. But I did work hard on it, and I wrote it, and I can't promise it's good because I wrote it and then read over it like one more time, and I haven't like gotten it edited by anyone. But if you want to see more of my thoughts, and that also kind of goes through more of the plot of the film too, so I talk more about like specific events in the plot and my interpretation of them. So if you want more of that, feel free to read it. But other than that, if you have any ideas for other movies you want me to watch or things you want me to do a video on, I was thinking of doing another video on like a fun 2000s rom-com, just like a quick little video that won't be an hour long, hopefully. So if you like the sound of that, feel free to let me know down below. It would be so helpful, so helpful if you wanted to comment on this video and like it and also subscribe to my channel. I hopefully will be posting more this semester. This is video 2, so like we're already on a roll. But aside from that, I think this video is long enough as it is, so thank you so much for watching. I hope to see you in my next video, and goodbye.
Someone running upstairs on all fours would give me the ick.
Strongly disagree. I think it's funny.
I'm just gonna go upstairs.
Yeah, see it as like.
We do voice notes.
Oh, yeah, we do.
The Irish mammy voice notes.
Yeah.
Look, we could do it, but
You got really addicted to speaking like this.
Yeah.
But now, after Claudia, I look like his tiny dad.
His tiny dad.
Yeah.
The Gladiator.
Beach Boys. Do you think of it? Is that not? Why is that funny?
Why is that? It's not funny. It's absolutely mental.
Why would you talk about liking them a lot today?
The Beach Boys.
Right, not the Beach Boys. I'm gonna take that back. That never happened.
Hold on a second. When did I said today?
Oh, the Pet Shop Boys.
Pet Shop Boys.
It was the Pet Shop Boys.
The Beach Boys.
My new Roman Empire is when we're gonna get you
Boys.
into a lunatic asylum.